Cash management. Again, I have preemptively brought in one of the Sage Intacct demo bank feed. So I'll have some transactions already created, but because last time, again, I was doing the refresh, and if anybody's on bank feeds currently, it sometimes takes Intacct a little bit of time to populate those initial transactions. I know that the bank feeds will refresh every 2 hours was the last that I checked. It's either 2 or 4 hours. I do believe it's every 2 hours. And so there is a little separation of what a bank feed is as it relates to Intacct. So let me go over that just real quickly. So I'm going to go into one of my checking accounts, and this is the one that this 300 underscore SVB. It's kind of funny. The bank name's Silicon Valley Bank, and I don't know if y'all read the news lately, but at any rate, I just caught that. All right. So anyways, I'm going to go into the edit, and I'm going to look at our bank cloud. And so here is where we would enter in to set up the bank feed specifically to that specific account. Obviously, I already have this one connected. The status is connected. What I will say to you is one of the gotchas that I've seen with some of our clients is on the login for bank feeds. Intacct currently does not support if your bank requires a digital token on your initial login to their bank. So if you have digital tokens, that would be an opportunity to work with the bank to see if there is a way to set up just a read-only user potentially, because all we're doing with the bank feed is we're pulling transactions from the bank for these specific accounts. So you may want to, reach out to us, and we can kind of, we will help you walk through those steps if they even, if the bank even allows for that. Another thing is multi-factor authentication. So I want to touch base on this just real briefly. So your multi-factor authentication is not unlike your personal bank account. If you log in to it from, a vacation, if you're on vacation and you log in on a public computer, the bank will record that IP address as a new IP address. And so on multi-factor authentication, what will happen is you'll usually, and for Intacct currently, it only supports to have that text message to a phone. So if, what I would advise, if you're having multi-factor authentication with your bank, I would set up at your bank an additional user that is a read-only user, and then utilize that user for your login for your bank feed. The idea behind that is Intacct will, ping the bank every 2 to 4 hours, and we want that IP address to remain the same every time, so it's not having to, refresh the connection or revalidate. If you use it with a current user, so let's say I'm, Nick Ori, and we use my login for Silicon Valley Bank, then what the bank is going to record is Intacct's IP address and then my home computer or my work computer's IP address when I'm logging in to the bank. And so what we've discovered is when Intacct is trying to refresh the bank feed, it's now the bank is requiring that text message code. So in order, the best practice is to work around that, is create that individual user within your bank platform that would be purely just that initial connection on Intacct bank feeds. And then going forward, you shouldn't, the bank should not require that multi-factor authentication going forward. I will admit that sometimes, depending on the security features you have within your bank, you may have to reset a password occasionally, and then that may require a revalidation on the bank feed. Okay. Again, that's one of those wonky things that, we've, kind of the lessons learned as you have more clients engage on this. So that's that. So we'll just go there. So that's your banking cloud, and we're seeing that it is in a connection. And again, you can hit refresh, and it's probably going to give me an error. Okay, your last refresh request finished today at 7:46 a.m. Refresh again at 9:46. So it's a 2-hour gap that you'd have to wait on that. Okay. So as I said, we already have, I've already engaged the bank feed with this particular bank. What I want to do is, after that, we can go into bank transactions. So these are going to be exclusively the transactions that are coming over from bank feeds. And so, yeah, leave. I love the warning signs. So here is, all of our good fun stuff, right? All of the transactions that have brought over from that demo company or your bank, in for example. So I will preface this. You can do, and in my previous webinar, I went over bringing in a CSV file on the reconciliation, and I'll go over that here in a minute when we jump in. But what I will say is sometimes those rules that you set up based on an export file of your transactions from the bank will differ from what is picked up on the bank feed. Sometimes, the triggering mechanisms are going to be a little bit different, especially depending on, you have to format that CSV file that you're going to upload in if you were to manually upload in those transactions. So you could have, not as much information on that import to where, your bank feeds may no longer work when you set up your bank match rules, apologize, will no longer work when you set up a bank feed. So it's always good to reevaluate once we've set up the bank feed to look at these transactions and see what is being fed over from the bank account. So case in point, most of those CSV files, may just only show a withdrawal or deposit or debit or credit. They may not show a document type that's interest, or they may show a transfer, but they may not show, all these various different document types, if you will. And again, if we've keyed that match rule based on a document type, that's when we would definitely have to come and reevaluate what we have going on. Also based on the description field, those can differ sometimes. So anyways, so right here, looking at these bank transactions, currently we have, a status of unmatched, and that's purely because we have not started a reconciliation for this account for this period. We have not set up any rules that are applied to this this bank account, so that's why they're all going to be in an unmatched status. Here in a minute, we're going to create some match rules and have those trigger to match these to Intacct transactions. We'll go over the methodology of that and how we can kind of group them, and then we're going to have a couple of create rules that I'm going to create. I want to kind of revisit the create rules from the last webinar that I did, just purely based on there's some additional information that we've gotten on the create rules and some of the limitations with those, so I want to make y'all aware of it. Okay. And from your bank transactions, again, here are all of these, and you can view them. So in viewing them, that's going to give you the more in-depth ping of what is feeding over. So this top portion up here is going to be what is coming from the bank feed. Here in a minute, we'll see a match transaction that will show these are the Intacct transactions. Those are two separate things, a bank feed transaction and then the Intacct transaction that it would match to. So that's going to be the translation between those two. The top portion is going to be from your bank. The bottom portion is going to be from Intacct. Okay. So bank rules, reconciliation rules. All right. So and keep in mind, this is my demo company, so I do have a couple of bank rules already created. And also, since this is my demo company, we do have some that come over from Intacct automatically. I have, again, preemptively looked at some of these. I know I kind of cheated a little bit because I didn't want to, slow us down on actually creating, a lot of the transactions in the JE or in the general ledger that we're going to reconcile. But at any rate, we'll do an add. And so within this, you have two different types of a rule. It's a match rule and a create rule. So kind of self-explanatory. A match rule is going to be exclusively based on matching transactions from the bank feed to Intacct. And then a create rule is going to be based on what is coming over in that bank feed from the bank we can tell the system to create a transaction within Intacct for us. And we're gonna dive into that just a little bit more. Let me see which one I want to start with. Okay, yep, that's the one I want to do. Okay, so let's begin with a create rule. Your IDs, as with anything in Intacct, have to be a unique ID. And I almost always forget what my last ID was. So we'll just do 1000 because I know I haven't done that one yet. Your name is also required. So we're going to say account interest on this. And then, your description is going to be optional. Okay. So on a create rule, I do have to bring this up. Your filter transactions by, you always want to include a filter on your create rules. And that's just so we can limit down what we're identifying from the bank. So on this, we're going to say our data source is a bank transaction. And keep in mind, if you'll notice, the only one you can do on data source is a bank transaction. And again, that's because we're going to create transactions from the bank feed, from, if you will, the bank transactions. So, you wouldn't create it from Intacct because you can go make a journal entry, so on and so forth, and Intacct wouldn't trigger to make a create rule. Okay. All right, so on this one, I'm going to choose document type. And again, this is going to be based on, that bank feed transaction, the bank transactions, on identifying what parameters we want to look at. So for this one specifically, we're going to look at the document type. And then here's where we can say, hey, look, equals, what's the operator? Equals, contains, does not contain, begin with, ends with. So we can kind of search through what that document type is. Document type not as prevalent for a contain field, but however, a bank description field would be a good one to have, and we'll go over that here in a minute. So for this, we're going to say equals, and then I know what the value is for an interest based on that bank transaction. And let me flip back to that. Let me duplicate and feed over back to it just so I can bounce between them for you. So we have a bank transaction. And so we have a document type INT, and so here are the INTs that we want, right? So that's why we're triggering it based on that INT. Okay. Again, here's where I like to kind of play with it a little bit, especially on, if you will, a bank fee or a bank charge from your bank. So I like to have in there the data source amount, and I like to say less than. Um, I'm sorry, I'd put in a range. Um, and so you can't do the range, so you do one line that's greater than. And so for this, I'm going to say greater than 50. And then my next field is going to be an amount less than, say, $100. And so what this is going to do is, especially think of it from the standpoint of a bank charge. If there's a bank error, I think of Monopoly. It's you get that chance card where bank finds an error and they give you $100. So this is just to mitigate those outliers that the bank may be feeding to you. So if your bank charges are normally, $200 a month, and one month it's $1,000 a month, we're going to put in these parameters that are greater than, less than, because we don't want that rule to be triggered, because that will make us look at it on a manual basis, if you will, to validate, oh, something went wrong here. It requires a little bit more looking into. On your create rules, also, your bank transaction, we want to look at the posting date for it, and we want to say greater than. And so what I do on these is I will look for the date. I'll set the date to equal to something the next day after the last reconciliation that I did. And that's just from the standpoint of, on a bank feed, if you set up the bank feed incorrectly to where you're grabbing stuff from a year ago on this create rule, because those transactions will be in that queue for bank transactions. If you miss this and you go back to a previous period that you've already reconciled, Intacct will create those transactions for you. So again, be real careful on when you want that to trigger off. Again, we can set, move these around. So that means, what is the order of how we're going to look at this data. So, all right. So we've got our filter transactions pretty well lined out. We've identified it, relatively well. Again, you can slice this all the way down. You can go on and on. You can add more lines. So you can really get specific on what you want on these filtering the transactions by. Okay. So define the transaction to create. And so here's where I'm going to also kind of do a little ad lib of your bank transfers. We have to be careful about it in Intacct on bank transfers. Bank transfers between bank accounts that are at the same entity, we can create a create rule for. That usually is not a problem. I will say Intacct does not currently support creating inter-entity transactions based on a create rule from the bank bank rules. I apologize. So, if you're funding one account at one entity from another account at a different entity, you're not going to be able to have those create rules that are going to trigger the do to froms. Our best advice for that is, when you have those instances, which I believe most people do, to upload those transfers as a journal entry in your general ledger with the source entity identified. That way you'll have those triggers for the inter-entity auto creating. But again, if it's the same account, if it's a different bank account within the same entity, you can have those create rules, because you're not ever going to have the inter-entity due to froms trigger. So the type that we want, transaction type is going to be a journal entry. And again, we're going to tell the system, hey, I want you to create these, right? And so I already have an interest set up, but we'll go ahead and add one just for fun. And so this is the transaction template. I'm going to go 1001. Interest create and our journal. So again, here's where I prefer to have a separate journal created for bank feeds with the mindset of the system is going to generate all these journal entries for us, right? And so I usually will, you know, if you do have restrictions on journals, I usually don't allow you know, normal users to have access to that bank feed, because again, I want to be able to single out and identify the journal entries that are created by a bank feed. So you certainly can put them as a general journal, but again, that's going to mix it in with all your other journals, general journals that you create. So just food for thought there that, you know, I highly recommend creating a journal code bank feed that's exclusive to it. Okay. Now, posting status. You can do this one of two ways. You know, it's either in a post or a draft or a posted state. So what will happen if you have it as a draft on a create, right, is it will require you to go into that journal entry. Yeah, the journal to look at those draft, and then you would have to manually post those. Additionally, and Evan, I see your hand is up. We'll catch back to you here in a minute. So on the draft, if you do it in draft on the bank rec, when we do the reconciliation, it's going to have it in a partial match status. And what that'll mean is, hey, you have some journal entries that are going to need to be posted as from a draft status in order for the bank rec to fully match it. So with this, we're going to go with a post. And then interest expense. Yeah, I know that's probably a little backwards, but anyways, you can do allocations on these. So if you are using the allocation, and that's the regular allocation, not the advanced allocation. So you can allocate these out to two different departments. Again, this is the trickier part on the allocation of if you have it allocating out by entity, it's not going to create those inter-entity transactions. So I definitely shy away from setting that. Okay. My department and then my location. And then you can have this as a memo. Again, we can have, so what this is going to be is this is going to show up in your memo line of your journal entry. Feed entry. And so what's going to happen here is we're going to say, hey, all of this, we want this transaction to create hitting this department in this specific location. What I will say on the general entry offset, if you leave the department and location blank, in this demo environment, I would have to populate a department because on the bank account, I don't have department identified. But let's say that I didn't require department for all GLs. What will happen if you leave it blank? It will create the both debit and credit side of this transaction based on what your bank account is set up for location and department, if you will. So one of my annoying things for this is you don't have the opportunity. It's an all or nothing. So if you say department 200 and location in this offsetting journal entry, this department and location is going to be applied also to the bank account department and location. So again, you identify it here, it's going to be on both sides. If you don't identify it here, it's going to hit both sides based on your bank account setup. And I'll show you that here in a second. All right, so yay, we're happy with that. So I want to save it.
Nick, I just want to pause for a second. Can somebody do a raise hand or a thumbs up if you guys can still hear Nick okay? I'm getting some feedback, so I don't know if it's my phone or if it's Nick's. So if somebody could just raise a hand or put in the question or something if you guys can still hear him okay.
Oh, Christina, can you hear me okay, or we have issues?
Okay. I think everybody, so I think it's me. Okay. Just making sure it's me and not you.
Okay. All right. So, and I apologize. It might be a little sketchy for my internet. So, we've created a rule. Now you have to add those rules to a rule set. And so again, I've got a couple of rules already set. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to create a new rule set. And this is the idea behind each bank account can only have one rule set applied to it. So you create the rule set with all the applicable rules within it. So we'll just keep it simple. If I could spell, good night. I couldn't have misspelled that worse. And so we have a bank account. So here's where, again, we're going to select a rule, and it's the one that I just created, and we'll go ahead. And I'm running low on time, so we'll go ahead and do a match concentration. We'll just add a couple. So you can come in and pick up various rules that you've created. Okay. And then on our accounts tab, we'll come over and we'll select what account we want this applied to. Oh no. I don't know what just happened. I don't know why it's not showing me bringing in that account. The bank account. Let me drop off this concentration. Let me see if that's going to work for me. No. Oh no. Houston, we have a problem. Okay, I do not definitively know why the savings account is the only one appearing here. That is very odd. Let me see on my, give me 1 second to flip back over to my checking account. Edit, do I have a rule? So I already have a rule. Shame on me, I have a rule applied to this already, the rule set. So that's why it wasn't appearing for us. So on this, again, this is from the checking account. You can only have that one rule set. That's why we only saw the savings account. So on this, I'm going to add in that new applied rule set. So that's two places you can add those rule sets, right? And this is also me kind of showing you, hey, here's the location ID and here's the department's blank for this bank account. But nevertheless, if you left that transaction offset blank, it would hit both sides of it based on the location ID within your bank account that's set up. All right, so we've saved that. So now when I come back over to our bank transactions, it did not create them, did it? Unmatched. Let me look real quick. 1 moment. That's the simple rule, but that's not the one that we had. Our rule set, let me make sure that rule set did get applied to that account. It is. It should be firing off that account interest. Goodness. And I will say sometimes these don't fire off as quickly as we would like. But yeah, I'm not getting anything on the match. Well, that's going to be problematic. So we'll not spin our wheels here. We can move on from that. That rule should have created and changed the status to a match. I am unsure as to why we're not having, I mean, should have created the create rule based on those. I will admit I may have goofed on something on that create. So We'll have to circle back to that at a later time. So at any rate, what we're going to do is we're going to go into your bank reconciliation to reconcile the bank. So here's the bank account, right? And I'm going to do it for today. And I know that I wrote down my statement balance 217,052.76. Okay, so, and again, on that, on the basics I showed that, you can bring in the attachment of that bank statement. So the PDF file to join with your reconciliation. Now, here's a thing. If you do the import, and this is the part where you can import those bank transactions, if you do that, what's going to happen is all of your bank feed data is going to essentially be turned off. So any match rules you would have based on a bank feed, if you decide to do an import file, it's going to unmatch all of those transactions that came over from the bank feed. And you will have to manually match those if you wanted to go back to, if you deleted out the file after you've brought it in, the bank feed will not re-trigger those match rules for any reconciling items that you have manually unmatched. So Intacct looks at an import file as manually unmatching it. So we'll continue here. Okay, so we do have some matched transactions. So when you bring in either a bank file and or the bank feeds, you'll go from just having the Intacct tab to also having a bank tab, okay? And that's how it delineates which is which, right? Is this came over from the bank, and when previously you would only have, I don't know why it's not showing what I want it to show on the interest. I'll have to look at the matched real quick. Give me one moment. Filters, invoice goods, that was $86. And that was, so it triggered for that, but it didn't trigger for the rest of them, which is fine. So it did trigger and create those transactions for us. And they are in a match status. So again, this is where you can bounce between, your state of matched and unmatched. And then, as I alluded to previously, if you have it in a draft status for the create rule, that's where you're going to have a partially matched on the bank file. Okay. So in looking at what we have here on the bank unmatched deposits, right? So up here, obviously, we're showing here's all the unmatched Intacct amounts. Here's the bank unmatched, and then here's our matched checks and debits and matched deposits and credits, right? So from if you're manually, because we're not going to always be able to capture everything to have it match every time, right? I will not lie, I was hopeful that I would be able to have more matched, but that's okay, because I'm going to show you a little bit of a trick, because inevitably we're not going to have everything match. So from that bank tab, we're looking at deposits, and we're going to say, yeah, over here on Intacct, deposit, supply filter, we will have that transact, I think it's that one. But we'll double check. So 1,034.99, right? So we're going to go to match, okay? And so on it, we can do in the bank amount that, okay, we've filtered it based on, that amount. And you can look at the document date up here. It's 3/16. So this is going to be applicable to this third line item. Okay, so the manual matching piece of this, so this is if our bank rules are not firing off the way we want it to, which they're not, we can select that transaction and it moves down to match transactions, right? And so remaining to match is 0. So what we can do is we've matched that and we can match go to next. Again, the amount has changed, so this is a bit of a tedious process to it, but it is a means of matching these individually. I do recommend doing it this way as opposed to what I'll show you in a minute. This is the first way you want to do it, and that is just so you can have those bank feed transactions in a match status from your bank transaction display. And I'll show you that here in just one second. And so we can come in and we'll hit save just for example, so we can go and look at, oh, that was another thing I meant to tell you before I hit save. I apologize. Let me go back into it. Well, that's okay. So a lot of y'all have also asked, okay, I want to export my bank transactions into Excel because something's going on and I don't know exactly what that is. We're going to cover that here in just one second. So on those match transactions, we're going to go to the bank transactions tab again. And now here are the, okay, here's one that's now no longer, it's in a match status, and that's because we had that create rule fire. So what that means is all your create rules that you set up will automatically go into a match status within Intacct. So you won't have to come back and select them or create a match rule, if you will, for those created transactions. So they, by default, will go into a match status. Here is, you know, the ones that we manually did, the $1,034.99, and then this $10,000 one. So I want to show you one little quick thing on this $86 one. We'll view that transaction. And if you'll see here, match mode is auto match, okay? That means that the system matched it. If we look at the other transactions that we manually matched, view that, it's going to show it as a manual match. So that's where you can differentiate between, is the system doing it or are we having to manually do that, okay? So one other item I wanted to bring up, and we're running quick on time. Maybe I just talked too much. I don't know. So exporting these transactions. So you're working on the bank rec and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't figure out what's going wrong, right? So what you can do is you'll go to the checking account, right? And so this is the one that we're working on, is the 300 SVB, right? And we have it in a pending reconciliation state, right? So if you click on that, you have an option for a CSV file. If you click that, it's going to obviously download. And so when we look at that file, that's my cheat. Okay, this is the reconciliation coming into Excel. I know that a lot of clients, you know, a lot of clients that I've had have always done their reconciliations in Excel, and that's where they're comfortable with until you get comfortable with Intacct. This is a means of getting that reconciliation into Excel, so you can, if you will, find out what you possibly did wrong. Again, it shows here's selected and here's pending. So again, here's the $86 ones that were auto-created, right? And then down here is the 1,034 that we manually match. So it's going to show you what is in a match state and what is in a pending state, meaning it has not been matched yet. Okay, so cool little feature that you can still get it in Excel. I know a lot of clients have had that concern, and in that they've wanted to have this in Excel to look at. Okay. So again, the other piece of this, let me go back into reconciling it, and I'm going to do it really quick, and we'll just, I know that this is not going to be a real world situation, but we're going to, we're going to match all of these. Just arbitrarily match them because I know that we've got it tied out. Match transactions. Obviously, you would not necessarily do this, but I want to get to the end result for y'all of having it all tie. All right, I should be that 1023 off, yes. And so I'm gonna go back to my matched and apply, because I intentionally left one, I left it as, I need to change it to matched, I apologize. And I intentionally did this. 10, or so I say, 223.03. And that was the 314 one. So I'm gonna unmatch that. And then I'm off by 1792. Okay, so I'm not going to beat myself up on this. I'm just gonna change the amount of the book balance. Or no, I'm sorry, the statement balance, just to get it to match so I can show you kind of the end result. So we'll save that, and I'm gonna just kind of force it to change for us. I do apologize for the difficulties we've obviously had. I always do this wrong, so we'll probably have to come back into it because I'm probably doing it the wrong way. Okay, I don't definitively know what just happened. I don't know why my amount, oh, it's creating them. That's what's happening. So it's automatically creating those transactions and it's throwing me off. I guarantee you that's what's happening, is the bank transactions are still firing. And so that's kind of one of those things of, don't shame on me for doing it right after we embedded the bank create rules. It's Intacct is still working in the background, and usually on those create rules, if it's a lot of transactions, it takes a little while to catch up. So that's what's happening, is I did it too soon. So at any rate, so I'm not going to be able to tie out that bank rec. But what I will say is, if you are on this reconciliation screen, let's go back to it real quick. Time's of the essence. And so on this, if what I just did was I manually matched those Intacct transactions, right? Without matching them to a bank transaction, right? Because here's all these bank feed transactions that are still sitting out here. Okay. What I advise is, if you're going to go the route of, I'm tired, I don't know what's going on, and it's tedious to say match individually, which I do understand. That's what I showed you previously, was manually matching those transactions to the bank feed. If you decide to do it, more or less old school, to where you're just selecting those transactions and matching them from Intacct, what I highly, highly, highly recommend after you've got the reconciliation zeroed out and you're completed, is going back to your bank transactions. And for all of these that are unmatched, right, is if we've done the reconciliation through 316, I want to select all these transactions and ignore them. What that's going to do is, going forward, when you do your next reconciliation, these transactions are not going to show up on that bank feed tab for the actual reconciliation. So it's kind of housekeeping. It just keeps it a little bit cleaner for you. So you would come in here, and this is after the reconciliation is done. You would come in and ignore those transactions. Okay. So I am sorry for the difficulties that I had on getting that bank feed to, update. I should have done it earlier, so I can show you more stuff. I want to be respectful of y'all's time. So with that, I will stop the demo of bank feeds.